man, this movie, it's just too much.
Yeah, the writers are on the set. These are twisted minds to come up with stuff like what we just saw. Do you fear
what's
them?
their deal?
Yeah.
There's more killing in this movie than I think any movie I've ever seen.
The 1980s were a golden age for sci-fi, bold ideas, wild special effects, and stories that pushed every boundary. But some films went so far, they didn't just spark debate, they got banned. Whether it was due to graphic violence, twisted plots, or ideas considered too dangerous for the time, these movies shook censors around the world. In this video, we're diving into the most controversial sci-fi films of the 80s, the ones that lit up screens briefly before being pulled from them. Some became cult classics, while others vanished into obscurity. Let's get started. Number 10. A Clockwork Orange. Although A Clockwork Orange was released in 1971, its true firestorm came during its 1980s revival screenings when it sparked so much outrage that director Stanley Kubrick himself pulled it from British theaters. The film follows Alex DeLarge, played chillingly by Malcolm McDowell, a charismatic but violent young man whose gang commits horrific acts before he's subjected to psychological reprogramming. But the true discussion was not simply the obvious brutality and disturbing imagery, but the film's haunting question. Is it more horrifying to enable a man to choose evil, or to force him to choose good? Kubrick's mix of classical music, particularly Beethoven, with horrific imagery had an unexpected impact that made many viewers uneasy. Critics hailed it as genius, but the public was split. Some called it art, others called it dangerous. After a string of violent crimes were allegedly inspired by the movie, Kubrick requested it be withdrawn from UK circulation, a ban that lasted until after his death in 1999. During the 1980s, the film was banned or outlawed in several countries, including South Africa, Spain, Singapore, and Canada, citing moral or political concerns. Authorities said it glorified violence and would corrupt young minds. However, its influence on fashion, music, and pop culture was clear. Protests were common at revival screenings, but the controversy only served to strengthen the film's legacy. During heated debates about prison reform and mental health, Kubrick's dismal portrayal of a society concerned with force over morality sparked outrage. Even after decades, A Clockwork Orange remains a film that challenges, disturbs, and refuses to be dismissed. A Clockwork Orange was known to be too dangerous for Britain, but this next film was so brutal that it was banned on sight. Let's find out more. Number 9. Cannibal Farox. If one movie epitomized the controversy surrounding 1980s exploitation cinema, it was Cannibal Farox. The film, directed by Italian filmmaker Umberto Lenzi and released in 1981, follows a group of young travelers who venture into the Amazon to dispel the idea of cannibalism, only to discover the hard way that the myth is quite real. What follows is a bloody slide into violence, torture, and survival, all wrapped in a packaging so severe that it was instantly prohibited in some countries. Cannibal Farox was added to the infamous Video Nasties list in the United Kingdom almost immediately after its release, citing its relentless violence and graphic images of animal misuse. The film not only crossed the boundary, but also utterly ignored it. Viewers were appalled by images that depicted real animals being harmed on camera, a now unthinkable practice that won the film widespread condemnation. The film's script, which had sexist, misogynistic speech and awkward performances, fueled the fire. Much of the cast had backgrounds in adult films, and the acting did little to soften the movie's already brutal tone. Critics and audiences alike blasted the film for its lack of subtlety and its exploitation of shock value over storytelling. Despite, or because of, its infamy, Cannibal Farox became something of an underground legend. However, its radical nature rendered it radioactive to censors, who saw it as a corrupting influence on public morals. Cannibal Farox is still considered one of the most controversial films of all time. It was not only prohibited, but also virtually eliminated from civilized conversation in the 1980s. But for those who dared to watch, it provided a raw, unfiltered glimpse at exploitation cinema at its most brutal. So, what movie was too anti-American for both the East and the West, which led to it being banned? Keep watching to find out. Number 8. Escape from New York. John Carpenter's Escape from New York wasn't just an action-packed thrill ride, it was a cinematic middle finger to the American system. Released in 1981, the film imagined Manhattan as a maximum security prison, where crime had spiraled so far out of control that the US government had simply given up. Kurt Russell's legendary character, Snake Plissken, is a war hero turned outlaw, sent into the ruins of New York to rescue the president from chaos. But underneath the explosions and shootouts was a darker, more dangerous message. America was broken beyond repair. For many, the prospect of a corrupt, decaying society was all too real. Several Eastern Bloc countries officially prohibited the film, fearing that its bleak image of a collapsing city would foment revolutionary spirit among their citizens. Ironically, the Soviet Union condemned it as capitalist propaganda, while other Western countries prohibited it owing to its scathing criticism of American leadership. What truly worried officials was the film's portrayal of the US government as greedy, inept, and willing to sacrifice its people in order to maintain power. Carpenter brought this dystopia to life on a $6 million budget, using genuine abandoned structures and grimy VFX to make the deterioration feel all too real. Critics praised Carpenter's innovative direction and Russell's unvarnished performance, but concerned governments did not. Despite the outrage, Escape from New York was a box office hit, grossing more than $25 million domestically. Audiences were obviously captivated by its rebellious nature. It is now viewed as a prophetic warning about authoritarian excess and institutional collapse. However, in the 1980s, some countries refused to let their residents watch the film. The next film on the list warned the world about the Internet. Number 7. Videodrome. Long before smartphones and social media, David Cronenberg's Videodrome provided a dark view into the future of media addiction, terrifying censors around the world. James Woods plays an unscrupulous TV executive who stumbles into a bizarre broadcast containing actual torture and assassination. Watching it, however, does more than just irritate him. It literally changes him. As his body changes into a horrible hybrid of flesh and technology, the line between reality and illusion blurs. This was not only physical horror, it was a warning. Cronenberg proposed that violent media may literally rewire the brain, transforming viewers into vessels for chaos. With a $5.9 million budget, legendary effects artist Rick Baker delivered some of the most unsettling visuals in cinema history, including a stomach that opens like a VCR to absorb videotapes. Critics were sharply divided. Some saw genius, others saw madness. But one thing was certain: censors couldn't handle it. Videodrome was banned outright in several countries, including parts of Australia. In Britain, it was only allowed after major edits, especially scenes that blended intimate arousal with violence and technology. In Germany, authorities refused to release it theatrically at all, fearing its message about media-fueled psychosis would spark moral panic. What bothered regulators the most was the film's thesis. which claimed that watching violent entertainment could physically transform viewers into monsters. In an era when society was already concerned about television's expanding impact, Videodrome elevated that anxiety to nightmare land. Unsurprisingly, it flopped at the box office, with only $2.1 million. Universal Pictures struggled to promote something as edgy. Today, Videodrome is regarded as a prescient masterwork that foresaw everything from virtual reality to internet obsession. But in the 1980s, it was simply too much for most people to manage. Keep watching to find out more about 80s sci-fi movies that got banned. Number 6. The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing didn't just horrify audiences with alien gore, it shook them with a terrifying idea that under pressure, people become monsters themselves. Released in 1982, the film follows a group of Antarctic researchers, led by Kurt Russell, as they uncover a shape-shifting alien capable of perfectly imitating any life form. As suspicion spreads, paranoia takes over, and the real horror becomes the breakdown of trust among the men. What made The Thing so controversial wasn't just the groundbreaking creature effects by Rob Bottin, though those alone had audiences gagging and theater owners fielding complaint calls nightly. It was Carpenter's bleak, unforgiving take on human nature. With a $15 million budget, the film pushed the limits of practical effects, showing bodies twisting, splitting, and mutating in ways few had ever seen on screen. But the film's real message, that fear and isolation can tear society apart, was even harder to stomach. Critics were split at the time. Some admired the technical brilliance, while others dismissed it as too dark, too graphic, and too hopeless. Several countries, including parts of Germany, banned it outright, believing its themes of infiltration and distrust echoed Cold War fears a little too closely. In the UK, censors chopped up the most disturbing scenes depending on how much horror local audiences were believed to tolerate. Then there was the ending, grim, ambiguous, and deeply unsettling. Two survivors, unsure if either is still human, simply wait in the snow as death closes in. Universal almost reshot it, fearing audiences couldn't handle such a bleak conclusion. And maybe they couldn't. The Thing struggled at the box office, earning just $19.6 million, overshadowed by the warm and fuzzy success of E.T. But over time, the film found its place. Today, it is regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever produced. Its paranoid themes have aged well, ringing true with everything from the AIDS crisis to today's conspiracy-fueled internet culture. Even still, in 1982, many people thought The Thing had gone too far, not just in terms of what it portrayed, but also in terms of what it revealed about us. What could be the reason this next movie got banned? Stay tuned to find out. Number 5. Inseoid. This British sci-fi horror film, released in 1981 as Inseoid, generated significant outrage because of its terrifying premise and graphic content. The film, directed by Norman J. Warren and starring Judy Geeson, follows a group of scientists researching extraterrestrial ruins on a distant planet until one of them is attacked, impregnated by an alien race, and eventually driven insane. What ensues is a brutal frenzy in which she assassinates her teammates one by one, while under the control of a mysterious alien intelligence. Inseoid, which was shot on a limited £1 million budget, relied on spooky underground locations such as Kent's Chislehurst Caves and Malta's island of Gozo to create claustrophobic suspense. However, the film's fundamental theme, alien forced sexual act and pregnancy, propelled it into a highly contentious area. Despite strong box office results in the United Kingdom and overseas, many critics panned the film as a low-grade alien copycat with bad VFX, shaky performances, and an exploitative premise. Still, Judy Geeson's chilling performance stood out, earning her praise even from otherwise hostile reviewers. But for some countries, Inseoid wasn't just bad, it was unacceptable. The graphic scenes of alien insemination and violent aftermath led to outright bans in Finland, Germany, Iceland, and Sweden. Authorities cited its brutal portrayal of sexual violence and gory childbirth as too extreme for public viewing. While both Warren and 20th Century Fox denied that the film was influenced by Alien, the similarities and the much more graphic execution were hard to ignore. In the early 80s, Inseoid became part of the video nasties panic in parts of Europe, where censors were cracking down on films they deemed morally corrupting. Today, Inseoid remains a cult curiosity, shocking, flawed, and unforgettable. But in its time, it crossed lines that even the horror genre was still learning how to handle. But what happens when satire hits too close to home? Let's find out. Number 4. Brazil. Few films from the 1980s sparked as much backstage drama as Terry Gilliam's Brazil. On the surface, it's a visually pleasing dystopian story, but below it's a harsh critique of political control, corporate dominance, and bureaucracy's dehumanizing hold. Jonathan Pryce plays a modest government employee imprisoned in a future where a single administrative misstep results in torture, death, and a complete bureaucratic meltdown. The true drama, however, took place off-screen. Universal Pictures was so concerned by Brazil's political message that they attempted to suppress it. The studio believed that its scathing critique of Western democracy and monitoring would alienate audiences. Executives tried to turn the film into a diluted love story, but Gilliam refused. What followed was a public battle for creative control, with Gilliam going rogue and showing unfinished cuts to critics. When the Los Angeles Film Critics Association named it the Best Picture of 1985, Universal was forced to back down and release Gilliam's original vision. With a $15 million budget, Brazil constructed a dystopian world that seemed unsettlingly familiar. Each frame was a warning about how regular people could become cogs in a machine that values paperwork over human life. The film was banned or outlawed in several countries, particularly the Eastern Bloc, where its criticisms of official power hit too close to home. Even some Western countries wanted changes, particularly for images depicting torture and bureaucratic misconduct. But what actually alarmed both governments and studios was the notion that modern democracies could be just as oppressive as dictatorships, employing red tape, monitoring, and corporate influence to keep people in check. During the Reagan era, with fears of Big Brother growing, Brazil felt like a glimpse into a terrifyingly possible future. It only earned $9.9 million at the box office, thanks to Universal's lukewarm promotion, but its legacy has grown far beyond its initial release. Today, Brazil is recognized as a visionary masterpiece that predicted our surveillance-heavy, bureaucratic age, and the battle to get it seen became part of its legend. When dreams turn to nightmares, how far is too far? Let's find out. Number 3. The Evil Dead. Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead was more than just a groundbreaking independent horror film. It was a gory, no-holds-barred shocker that served as a lightning rod for censorship in the 1980s. The film, released in 1981, follows 5 college students on vacation in a rural cabin who unwittingly unleash ancient demons by playing a weird audio tape. What starts out as innocent fun quickly turns into a night of violent possessions, bizarre transformations, and non-stop gore, all centered on Bruce Campbell's now iconic figure, Ash Williams. The film was made on a shoestring budget of only $90,000 and shot in a chilly Tennessee cabin under harsh conditions. Raimi, Campbell, and producer Robert Tapert pushed everything they had into the film, using inventive prosthetics, handcrafted effects, and raw energy to bring their nightmare vision to reality. What was the result? A film so extreme that it was banned or prohibited in various countries, including Germany and the United Kingdom, and became one of the most notorious titles on the Video Nasties list. Despite its humble beginnings, The Evil Dead erupted overseas, grossing $29.4 million and enthralling horror fans worldwide. Even horror maestro Stephen King referred to it as the most ferociously original horror film of the year, which helped it earn broader distribution and cult appeal. However, the vivid savagery, demonic implications, and unwavering intensity alarmed censors, who saw it as a threat to public morals. Regulators were concerned by the film's obvious cruelty. Unlike polished Hollywood horror, The Evil Dead appeared dangerous, anarchic, unpredictable, and overflowing with deadly energy. Censorship boards in some nations have edited scenes, restricted distribution, or outright banned it, believing that it could corrupt young minds. Today, The Evil Dead is regarded as a watershed moment in horror cinema and one of the most popular independent films in history. It spawned a vast franchise, which included sequels, a television series, and video games. But in the 1980s, the scrappy little film horrified both spectators and authorities. This next movie sparked national outrage. Keep watching to find out more. Number 2. Silent Night. Deadly Night. When Silent Night, Deadly Night was released in 1984, it caused not only outrage among critics, but also a nationwide moral panic. The film tells the story of Billy Chapman, a young teenager who was traumatized by witnessing his parents' brutal assassination by a man dressed as Santa Claus. Billy was raised in a strict Catholic institution, and his trauma festers until years later, when he snaps and becomes a spree assassin in a Santa suit. While the slasher formula was nothing new, Silent Night, Deadly Night risked desecrating the image of Santa Claus, which few horror films had done before. The film's promotional posters, which showed Santa going down a chimney with an axe, sparked outcry from parents' groups, religious organizations, and even Hollywood peers. Protests occurred around the country, with people picketing theaters and demanding that it be removed from circulation. TriStar Pictures succumbed to the pressure and pulled the film from theaters after just 1 week, despite its excellent $2.5 million opening on a small $750,000 budget. But the harm was done. Critics and advocacy groups slammed the film's combination of holiday happiness and gory violence as perverse, shameful, and morally bankrupt. Censors saw Silent Night, Deadly Night as especially threatening because it implied that trauma, religious tyranny, and societal hypocrisy could turn even the most innocent person into a monster. The image was not only frightening, but also psychologically damaging, especially for those who expected Christmas warmth, but instead received blood-soaked horror. Despite being prohibited or fiercely opposed in some regions, the film remained popular. It went on to become a cult hit, inspiring 4 sequels, a remake, and an imminent relaunch. What began as a low-budget slasher quickly became a pop culture hotspot, known not only for its violence, but also for daring to paint Santa Claus in blood. But what if the reason this next movie was banned because it offended the Vatican? Keep watching to find out. Number 1. Hail Mary. When renowned French New Wave director Jean-Luc Godard produced Hail Mary in 1985, he sparked not only outrage, but also a worldwide religious firestorm. The film portrays the Virgin Mary as a young girl dealing with a surprising, miraculous pregnancy in a modern setting. While some critics praised its daring examination of faith, sexuality, and spirituality, others, including Pope John Paul II, branded it blasphemous. The repercussions were swift and devastating. Christian organizations in Europe and the Americas staged protests outside theaters. Screenings were picketed. In Italy, the reaction became so strong that Godard attempted to take the film from theaters to prevent further controversy. In Latin America, the response was considerably harsher. Hail Mary was formally forbidden in countries such as Brazil and Argentina, where officials regarded its message as deeply offensive to Catholic theology. The imagery, rather than recounting a sacred story, was what made the film so powerful. Godard employed poetry photography with profound symbolism to depict the sacred in very personal and often sensual terms. For traditional religious audiences, this was more vulgar than creative. Regardless of the complaints, or perhaps because of them, Hail Mary is a significant film in Godard's oeuvre. Its stunning visuals and thought-provoking themes have kept it current in both the film and academic realms. However, in the 1980s, its mere existence was perceived as a direct threat to religious authority, making it one of the most divisive sci-fi films of the time. Aside from these 10 most controversial 80s sci-fi movies that got banned, here are others that, although banned, still managed to hold out. On the Silver Globe. On the Silver Globe isn't just a sci-fi film, it's a cinematic resurrection. Directed by Polish visionary Andrzej Żuławski and based on a novel by his great-uncle, this surreal and ambitious story began filming in the late 1970s. It follows astronauts who colonize a distant planet, form a primitive society, and, generations later, worship a lone new arrival as their messiah. It's a film about myth, power, and the collapse of utopian ideals. But the story behind its production is just as wild as the movie itself. Filming began in 1976 with a massive state-backed budget, but Polish communist authorities grew increasingly uneasy. They saw the film's themes, especially those about blind belief, failed revolutions, and messianic delusion, as dangerous political allegory. In 1977, the government abruptly shut down production, destroyed key footage, and shelved the entire project. Żuławski was blacklisted. For over a decade, the film sat unfinished, incomplete, and nearly lost. But Żuławski refused to let it die. After political winds shifted in the 1980s, he was allowed to reassemble what remained. Using voiceover, stills, and fragmented scenes, he filled in the gaps and completed On the Silver Globe in a haunting patchwork form. When it ultimately aired at the 1988 Cannes Film Festival, it received rapturous applause. Critics praised it as a visionary work, chaotic, daring, and brimming with raw intellectual energy. Censors saw it as particularly hazardous because of its reluctance to conform. It dared to suggest that revolution can become religion, that leaders can become gods, and that utopias can rot from the inside. In a tightly controlled political climate, On the Silver Globe was seen as subversive, blasphemous even, not for its religious content, but for its challenge to authoritarian rule. Today, it stands as one of sci-fi cinema's most fascinating buried treasures, a film literally resurrected from censorship's grave. But what happens when alien horror meets exploitation overload on Earth? Keep watching to find out. Forbidden World. Released in 1982 under multiple titles, including Mutant and Subject 20, Forbidden World was Roger Corman's attempt to cash in on the success of Alien, but with way more sleaze. Directed by Alan Holtzman, the film blended science fiction, horror, and heavy doses of eroticism. The story centers around a futuristic lab dealing with a genetically engineered creature gone rogue, a deadly experiment known only as Subject 20. Instead of focusing on suspense and story, Forbidden World dove straight into graphic violence, nudity, and bizarre body horror. Critics criticized it as a cheap copy, pointing to duplicated sets, repurposed footage from Battle Beyond the Stars, and chaotic editing. Nonetheless, the picture developed a cult following due to its over-the-top style and somber electronic score by Susan Justin. What really pushed the movie into banned territory in countries like the UK was its exploitative content. The creature's attacks were grotesquely sexualized, and the film's mix of gore and graphic scenes led to it being placed on the infamous Video Nasties list. Censors in conservative markets viewed it as a tasteless blend of sci-fi and softcore, too explicit for mainstream release. Despite the backlash, Forbidden World has gained a strange legacy. It's often celebrated or mocked as one of the most audacious examples of 80s low-budget sci-fi excess, where shock value was the entire point. It's messy, it's grotesque, and it's definitely unforgettable. And just when you think it can't get weirder, guess what returns? Stay tuned to find out. Extra. Extro, released in 1983, immediately became one of the weirdest and unnerving sci-fi horror films to emerge from the United Kingdom. Harry Bromley Davenport wrote and directed the picture, which depicts the story of a man who strangely returns home after being abducted by aliens. Only he is no longer human. What follows is a bizarre journey through alien births, altered monsters, and a terribly upsetting family reunion. While critics panned the film for its unclear plot and inconsistent acting, Extro regained some appreciation for its brutal practical effects and unrepentant eccentricity. Viewers couldn't take their eyes away from scenes of hideous transformations, alien impregnation, and a notorious childbirth process that made them squirm in their chairs. The film's gruesome body horror and themes of alien manipulation landed it on the UK's Video Nasties list, resulting in an outright ban and significant censorship. Even in countries where it wasn't banned, Extro was often trimmed down or dumped straight to VHS due to its shocking content. Over time, though, Extro gained cult status, not because it was polished or profound, but because it dared to be completely unhinged. It's the kind of horror film that feels like a fever dream, uncomfortable, grotesque, and impossible to forget. This next film was known for its explosive violence. Maybe that was the reason it was banned. Keep watching to find out more. Contamination. This 1980 Italian sci-fi horror film, sometimes known as Alien Contamination or Toxic Spawn, set new standards for grossness. Contamination, directed by Luigi Cozzi, is about an alien cyclops who sends slimy green eggs to Earth. These eggs are not only terrifying, but they also explode in people's faces, causing their insides to burst in a shower of gore. Heavily inspired by Alien, but with way more blood and way less budget, the film swaps suspense for spectacle. Critics weren't impressed by the acting or story, but one thing they couldn't ignore was the explosive violence. The scenes of people literally blowing up were so graphic and over the top that the film landed on the UK's infamous Video Nasties list and was banned in several countries. Despite the negative reception, the film's spooky synth music by the famed Italian band Goblin stood out and became a cult favorite. Contamination developed a cult following among viewers who enjoyed its campy appeal, crazy effects, and no-holds-barred gore. Contamination, whether you love it or detest it, is a gooey, gut-busting experience that leaves a mess in its wake. But what if the horror felt so real it sparked a trial? Stay tuned for more details. Cannibal Holocaust. Cannibal Holocaust 1980 is more than a film. It is an attack on the senses. This Italian exploitation chiller, directed by Ruggero Deodato, follows a documentary crew who disappears in the Amazon only to discover footage revealing horrific acts of cannibalism, brutality, and anarchy. However, the film's dread extended beyond the screen. Its stunningly realistic representations of sexual violence and animal cruelty sparked worldwide outrage. The argument heated up when Deodato was arrested immediately after the film's premiere, suspected of assassinating his cast. He needed to bring them to court alive to establish they hadn't been assassinated. Cannibal Holocaust was banned in several countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the United States, but was subsequently released in several of them years later. Despite the backlash, the film is now acknowledged as a terrifying pioneer in the found footage genre, and it remains one of the most contentious films ever made. It's violent, insistent, and unforgettable, whether you like it or dislike it. So, aside from these, do you know any more movies that were banned due to their controversial nature? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.